All right. So in this unit, which we call ecology, we've already talked about the natural world, ecosystems, energy flow, symbiotic relationships, all those things. That's sort of the science of ecology. The very last section of this unit is about how humans are impacting ecosystems around the world. So we're talking about a bunch of different topics related to that. We call this human impacts. And so in general, I'm sure you have an idea, how do humans impact the environment? So
it's not really the best sometimes.
Often negatively, right? And so let's think about why. So why do humans have a large, oftentimes disruptive impact on the earth?
Well, we're always
Two real important things. One is that humans have the ability to alter their environment more than any other species. We can take.
I don't think we have this. I don't have it.
Yeah, it's on the front.
I'm tape.
Did I not give you one? Look.
Okay.
I got it here. So, for example, humans can take an area of desert, like in Nevada, a place that's very dry, very warm, and transform it into an area where millions of people could live. And how were we able to do that? By bringing in water from other places, by using technology like air conditioning, by transforming one ecosystem basically into another. Humans can alter their environment more than any other species. And also, there's a lot of us.
We are growing.
How many? Do you know how many people there are currently?
It's
Aisha?
growing. I think about
Hold on, Aisha? Yeah, we just reached 8 billion people on Earth. That's a lot of people. And those people, they all require food, water, a place to live. They require energy. They want things like iPhones and cars and PlayStations and things like that.
I don't report that much.
And so if we think about the Earth has resources, natural resources. And humans need some of those natural resources. And if we use more of those resources than are available, then that can have serious impacts on the environment. We talked in the last section of the unit about carrying capacity, the number of organisms that can be supported in an ecosystem. Well, what if we exceed? What if we go past the carrying capacity of the Earth? What if the number of people becomes more than the amount of resources that the Earth can support?
we're doomed.
Then that can lead to lots of negative consequences. Wars, poverty, famine, things that happen when you run out of resources. And so this is a little outdated. This is about 18 years old. Aisha told us a minute ago. If we were to draw this graph, we would now be past the top of the graph. But this shows the population of the world from about 10,000 years, last 10,000 years or so. And so look, these are billions. So look at the population of the Earth, right? It grew slowly for a long time. Okay. But even like 500 years ago, it was still less than 500 million. You can see the drop after the plague.
Yeah.
But then what happened?
Well,
Yeah, after about the 1800s, look what happens to this graph. It starts to we call it exponential growth. It starts to skyrocket. What are some of the reasons? Raise your hand if you can tell me why in around the 1800s did the human population here start to skyrocket? There's a few things that you might explain that. Francesca?
Industrial Revolution.
So the Industrial Revolution happened in the 1800s. How does that relate?
Well,
What did industrialization allow humans to do? Get more resources, extract more resources through the use of machinery, produce more goods through mechanization and factories. That's one reason. Aisha, did you have a different reason?
I was gonna say before the Industrial Revolution, basically people lived near the Middle Ages, and once the Industrial Revolution like we can make there's refrigeration and also stuff like vaccines, all these things.
And now we're getting there, especially. What was the last word you said? Vaccines, medicine, medical treatments, more knowledge about infection, okay, antibiotics. All of those discoveries that happened in the last 300 years or so all allowed humans to start to live much, much longer than they did previously because we now have vaccines that prevent us from getting serious illnesses. We have antibiotics, which prevent us from getting infections or from infections killing us. We have modern medicine. We have surgical methods. We know about pathogens, so we can pasteurize things and make sure we're not ingesting dangerous pathogens. So all those things led to this graph increasing so quickly. And as that population has gone from 200 million to 8 billion, as I just was talking about, they require a lot of resources. When you have that many people, they require a lot from the earth. So we call those things natural resources. And we kind of split them into two categories: renewable resources and non-renewable resources. What does it mean to renew something?
get something back.
Get something back. Something that returns. Something that gets replenished over time. We call that a renewable resource. And things that do not replenish over time, like fossil fuels, we call non-renewable because they're not replenished over time. If you dig from the ground a chunk of coal, it was formed tens of millions of years ago, and then you burn that coal, it's not coming back. It's used up. It's gone. Or if you mine from the ground lithium, a mineral, and then use it, it's gone. It's not coming back again. And so non-renewable resources can be used up over time.
Yeah, that's what always scares me. Like, what if we run out of coal and gas and all that?
Well, we will run out of those things if we continue to use them because they're not forming now. So we could run out of those things. So that gets us to how do we get energy? So we use lots of electricity, energy. We need energy to heat our homes in the winter here. Some of us use energy to air condition our homes, keep them cool. Use energy when you put gasoline in a car to drive somewhere. You use energy when you charge your iPhone. And so where does that energy actually come from? There's different ways we can get that energy. In some ways.
I know some ways to get energy.
So let's talk about
solar.
Let's talk about some renewable sources of energy. Some ways we can get energy that doesn't actually use that up, that it will be replenished. Solar energy. What is solar energy?
Well, they use the power of the sun's rays to power things.
So this calculator Luke was using a minute ago, what does it have on the very top? It's a little solar cell. These are called photovoltaic cells. And basically, when light hits them, they make electricity.
Does it look like a cell or is it
And that's how this calculator works. Obviously, this is a really small one, but this gives enough electricity that this calculator works without any batteries in it. It just needs some light. Have you ever seen solar panels on someone's house?
Yeah.
Sometimes people install them on the roof.
Like the solar plates.
Yeah. And again, when the sun shines on those photovoltaic cells, they make electricity that a person can use in their house. If you travel around, you might see larger scale photovoltaic installations, like up past Accelerate Sports, you see that. There's a solar, a bunch of large solar panels. Again, they're making electricity, but they're not using up any resources to make that electricity. The sun's, if you put up more solar panels, it's not like the sun's going to run out of energy, right? It is going to continue to release that energy. So that's renewable. It's replenished constantly. Has anybody seen around here another way of making electricity with renewable energy?
I think they
Hold
use-
on.
I was gonna mention.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say water energy.
Which one? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. I want to go to one more before I get there. Wind turbines,
Oh, yeah.
which you can see.
What about water?
Yeah, that's what I use. So I'll get to that one in a minute. Water is another one. So wind turbines. You can see them if you drive south of here near like Waterville, up on the ridge. Dozens of large wind turbines. As the wind blows, it turns the blades, and they're connected to a generator. They make electricity, but it's renewable. It's not using up the wind. It's not like, oh, we've used up all the wind. It's the wind is there or it's not there. And so harnessing that energy can give us a renewable way to make electricity. And then Ray and Aisha both also mentioned water.
Electric power.
We have that was one of the first forms of renewable energy. Is if you have flowing water, you could put in that area a turbine, and as the water flows past the turbine, it spins it, and that makes electricity. Those are all renewable sources of energy. A wind turbine farm, hydropower, that's water, photovoltaic cells. Even we can harness energy from within the earth. It's called geothermal energy as well. These are all sources. And here's the other thing about these renewable sources of electricity. Do they release any pollution when they're made? Does a wind turbine have any pollution coming out of it?
No.
Nor does photovoltaic cell or hydropower. They don't pollute the air while they're working. And so that's another difference. And that's important when we start talking about pollution. So what are non-renewable sources of electricity?
Coal, gas,
Coal, hold on.
oil.
So coal, which is a solid that you could dig out of the ground, it's a big chunk. You could burn that coal and get the electricity, get energy out of it, transform it into electricity. So there's coal.
Yes.
Do you mean gas like for your car or the other type?
Like for your car.
Okay, so gasoline
Yeah, I guess.
you put in your car. Where's that? What is that? Where's that come from? How's it come out of the ground?
Oil.
Oil.
Yeah, it starts as oil. It gets refined into gasoline. So there's oil. There's one more. What's that? Yeah, so you have like a stove in your house with a flame that comes out? What is making that heat? What do we call that?
Kerosene.
Yeah, natural gas. That's why it's a little confusing when someone says gas. So, coal mining. Drilling oil wells to get oil out of the ground. Natural gas. Okay, it's another picture of coal. That's crude oil as it comes out of the ground. These are non-renewable, however. If you pump some oil out of the ground, turn the gas in, burn it in your car, it's not coming back. Same thing with oil or natural gas.
Made it dead.
And also, when we use these forms of energy, do they release pollution?
Yeah.
Yes, all of them, when they're burned, release pollution that has other important effects on the environment.
Somebody called Captain Planet.
So we'll talk about some of these issues that affect the environment.
You know,
We'll talk about species extinction. We'll talk about water pollution, air pollution, atmospheric changes. These are all important impacts that humans are having on the environment. We already, Jordan.
You know what would be really good
Hold on one
teaching
sec,
this?
Luke.
What about like normal fire, like wood?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Jordan's asking about wood. So is wood come back?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, we consider generally wood renewable because you could sustainably harvest wood. Like you could grow trees. If you have a big forest, you could cut down, dozens of trees, use that as fuel, and given enough time, like 5 or 10 years, they'll regrow. So yeah, wood is often considered renewable.
You know, like,
So is food
yeah.
that we eat. You can regrow food.
Did you make charcoal?
Charcoal's made out of wood. Yeah.
The,
That would be considered renewable also. But that's different than coal. Coal and charcoal are two different things. So we talked a little about this earlier. Extinction of species. So about 1 million species that we know of today are under danger of extinction.
They're all dead.
Why?
Oh, because their environments are being changed.
So yeah, there's several reasons. Sometimes humans actually are killing these animals purposely, right? By hunting, or we talked yesterday a little bit about poaching, right? So that's one way a species can become extinct. And there are some species when humans have hunted them to extinction or close. Elephants, for example. Elephants are they're not extinct, but they have been hunted for ivory to the point where they are in danger of being extinct. Right? Because ivory was bought and sold and traded
For bulwark balls and stuff.
for all sorts of different things. It is no longer allowed to be traded internationally, but people still do illegally kill elephants to harvest ivory.
Is it bad that it wants some ivory?
Yeah.
Oh.
Other species, for example, passenger pigeons, were a type of bird like a pigeon. They lived in North America. There were millions and millions of them. They were in flocks that were so dense that they would make it look like it was nighttime when a huge flock flew across the sky. Humans hunted them for sport to extinction. Passenger pigeons no longer exist on Earth. They were hunted to extinction in the early parts of the 20th century. The dodo bird is another bird that became extinct due to hunting. But there's other reasons. That's probably the minority of the reason that animals go extinct. It's not typically from people going out and purposely killing them.
Like the test
There's other reasons as well. Aisha, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. What if also since humans can go anywhere and adapt to their environment, the changes in their environment could affect already living animals in that environment and cause them to migrate across.
Yeah, definitely. And that's going to come to like the third bullet here. So another thing is by pollution. Humans using chemicals like pesticides to kill insects on crops. Those types of pollution that we release in the environment can also affect animals and plants and other species. And one example of this is bald eagles. Do you know anything about bald eagles and
Well, they were
their
endangered.
status?
Well, they were endangered.
They were endangered. They were almost extinct in North America. Do you know why?
Because they.
It was a type of pollution. It was from a chemical called DDT. DDT is a pesticide. It's a chemical you spray and it kills insects. And it was used extensively in the 20th century. People sprayed it all over crops to kill insects that were preying on the crops. They used it to kill mosquitoes that spread disease. And what they didn't realize right away was that DDT also had a serious negative impact on other species. DDT worked its way up the food chain, and it really had significant effects on birds. When birds like eagles at the top of the food chain are exposed to DDT, it causes the shell of their egg to be very, very thin and very fragile. So what happened is the eggs of eagles and other birds of prey started to become so thin they wouldn't hatch. They broke so easily. And basically, bald eagles were in danger.
I'm
They
done
were
with this. You want it?
almost going to become extinct. They are not. They're coming. They've come way back. You can go to Onondaga Lake near Destiny Mall, and there's a whole bunch of bald eagles over there. They are no longer in danger. They've been taken off of the list of endangered species.
They are pretty.
Can you guess how? Well, why are they no longer in danger?
Well, I remember a book called "I Know Why the Bird."
Yeah, Ray's exactly right. Once we learned about this in the 1960s, that DDT was having this effect, it was banned. And over time, the bald eagle population recovered because we decided we're no longer going to use this chemical as a pesticide. So that's exactly why.
Reminds me of an old book I used to read. I Know Why the Page Birds Sing.
Oh, yeah?
Well, I never actually read it, but I heard it's famous for that type of stuff.
There's another book that made that popular. It's called Silent Spring.
Oh, that's the one. That's the one. It
Rachel
wasn't that.
Carson, yeah. She made it. She published this book when she let everybody know the impact that some of these chemicals were having on wildlife. Silent Spring, yeah.
Yes, because the birds didn't sing. No,
Yeah.
it was just a different.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, same idea. And then Aisha mentioned this a minute ago. Also, how humans use the land impacts species. As humans have expanded where we live in the world, we have had to destroy the habitat of lots of different species. Also, humans need a lot of food. When we have a population of 8 billion people, the space to grow that food, to feed that population, comes from the habitat of various plants and animals as we expand. And this is especially an issue in like the tropical rainforest, like in South America and Indonesia, where people are destroying large areas of tropical rainforest to graze cattle, to raise for food. And you saw also in the video we watched yesterday, the guide, that in Mozambique, people were using some of the land in Mount Gorongosa to raise food for their families. And that encroached on the habitat of various species. And of course, people need to feed, and people are going to do that to feed their family. So the question is, well, how do we balance that? How do we find ways of allowing people to support their family while still helping to preserve environments?
For the human populations,
Is what?
might be stagnating.
In some countries it is. So there's a question of, well, will the human population, we saw that graph, will it continue to go like that? A lot of countries, its population growth has slowed down. For example, in the US, okay, in Japan, in Germany, in Italy. Some places population growth is leveled off, other places it continues to grow.
The only places where it continues to grow are in I think, like Nigeria or in
In lots of parts of the developing world, in countries that are still economically developing, often we see larger population growth. And it's a trend, like we have this model where we can sort of predict what happens to countries' population as they move through different phases of development. We have lost about 50% of the world's rainforests in the last 150 years. And again, as we talked about earlier, those are areas of huge biodiversity where you have many, many species living. And so that destruction of tropical rainforests has serious impacts. So we lose biodiversity, and as we learned yesterday, that means ecosystems are less stable. How do we improve on this? How do we stop the endangerment of species? Well, there's several things. By protecting areas of habitat. We saw in the video yesterday, Mount Gorongosa. There are, for example, in Africa, large national parks, Kenya, Tanzania, where large areas of habitat are protected, where hunting and farming are banned. In those in Costa Rica and Central America, there are large areas of parks where human activities are limited. And the purpose of that is to help preserve the species that live in these environments. we have laws called the Endangered Species Act in the United States that protects endangered species. So when the bald eagle was on the endangered species list, if you had a bald eagle living in a property, you couldn't do anything to harm it or its habitat as well. And so there are rules about how we treat the habitat of these endangered species.
So we harm it, we go to jail.
Yeah, it's illegal. So you're breaking a federal law if you were to harm an endangered
It
species.
is America's mascot.
Did they just would they just leave it on where it was, or like?
No, once its population recovered, it's taken off the endangered species list. So species can get added onto that list, or it can be taken off if they recover enough. Here's some examples of probably things you're familiar with. These are big species that we all have heard of, right? All of which are endangered.
Not the panda.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they have trouble mating.
And most of these are like the panda and the gorilla
So,
are and the red wolf about habitat destruction, about humans encroaching on their habitat. Others, like the elephants, are more about poaching and hunting.
Blue whale.
Pandas
Yep.
also are
I
like
mean, they
more
are
extinct just because they're stupid. They just don't like to do stuff.
Yeah.
That's
They-
really fun.
I don't know.
Pandas.
Yeah, you see, they don't like having sex for some reason.
They literally they don't.
Yeah, they don't mate well, especially in captivity.
Yeah, you got. I don't know.
It's like a big deal when I haven't seen pandas before.
No.
Yeah.
If you ever go to Washington, the Washington Zoo has pandas. They had offspring recently. There was a baby panda born in captivity.
That's nice. That's one out of.
Why not clone it?
Well, again, we talked about that earlier a little bit. Let's talk about one more topic here today.
The lampreys. Those are
Yeah, we talk invasive species. Invasive. Where does that word come from?
Well, you see, it means they're not from
Invasion, invade. And so invasive species are species that are somehow taken from one part of the world and brought to a different part of the world. For example,
The lampreys.
let me find it. Do I have
Sometimes they,
pictures? Hold on.
sometimes they adapt well. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they adapt too well.
Okay, let's do this one. These are something called zebra mussels.
Oh,
We have them in this area.
yeah.
The tiny little ones are the zebra mussels. And zebra mussels got to North America by kind of hitchhiking on ships crossing the ocean. Ships from Asia crossing the ocean. Sometimes they let water out of the ship when it unloads. And part of what might have happened is zebra mussels may have been in that water and they were accidentally introduced into North America. And then they expanded throughout all of the Northeast. They moved up rivers into the St. Lawrence Seaway, into the Great Lakes, down through the Mississippi. And their population grew very quickly because they had no predator here. In Asia, where they evolved, their populations don't grow out of control because there's things that eat them. Other species have adapted to eating them. But once they were brought here, species here, nothing ate them. So they had no predator to keep their population in check. And therefore, the number of zebra mussels grew very quickly. They clog up pipes. They cut people's feet when you go in the water. They filter out all of the food from lakes and rivers, leaving none left for other types of mollusks, like native clams.
Every time I go fishing, like I'll be fishing at Delta Lake this week. I just always get them on my lure.
Oh, do you?
One of them, yeah.
Yeah. They're not native there, right? They probably have been there for maybe 25 or 30 years. They were brought there. And it's also why, do you have a boat that you take from lake to lake? Or do you just
I
go
don't,
fishing?
but we like borrow one.
Yeah, so sometimes people have boats that they like put on a trailer and they bring them from one lake or they go fishing. And usually now in what they have is an area where you have to wash off your boat before you leave. And the purpose of that is to prevent you from spreading any of these species. Like if you had attached to your boat some zebra mussels and then you bring your boat to another small lake, You could be transporting them by accident. If you go camping, you're not supposed to bring firewood from one part of the state or the country to another, because by doing that, you could be bringing with you invasive insects. There's a whole bunch of them. So you're supposed to just get firewood from the site where you are.
There's a bunch of them in Hershey Park.
Yeah. There's rats are non-native.
Yeah, they went.
Pigeons.
From Europe.
Yeah, starlings. These came from Europe. Starlings are little black birds. Diseases like Dutch elm disease can be brought from one part of the world to another.
Like Corona.
This is purple loosestrife. We find this around here all the time.
Yeah, so
Do you know where the Utica Marsh is?
it's like the one where the big sign is.
If you go from Utica to North Utica near like BJ's, Lowe's,
Yeah, I see it.
you drive over a big marshy area.
That's where that big sign is.
There's the Utica sign there, yeah. Well, if you drive by there late in the summer, it's going to be covered with purple flowers. And they look really pretty. But they actually are not, they're invasive.
Yeah.
They were brought here from Europe for people to plant in their yards as ornamental plants. They escaped, however, and now they grow in marshy areas. What should be growing there in Utica Marsh is cattails.
Beautiful.
You know those long
Yeah, you burn them
plants and they got like a little hot dog on the top?
Tasty.
Yeah, I do.
That's our native wetland vegetation here. But they've been completely displaced in a lot of
I
places.
see them in like swamps. And stuff.
Yeah, that's where they grow, in the water. But they're being replaced by this purple loosestrife. And again, animals around here adapted to living with cattails, eating cattails, nesting there. They have not adapted to living in or eating this loosestrife. So it's displacing our native population. Aisha?
Isn't it like Florida and that type of snake there?
Yes. In Florida, pythons.
Oh yeah, the Everglades.
The Everglades are a huge swamp in southern Florida, and pythons are an invasive species there. They're not native. They never were there until. How did they get there?
I think it's like some people like had them and were like, I can't take care of a snake, so they just let it go in
People
the wild.
released their pet snakes in Florida, and these pythons established a population living in the Everglades, and they eat birds. They eat all sorts of native animals.
Mhm.
There actually is a program where they pay people
They kill them.
to go into the Everglades and kill as many pythons as
I mean, it
possible.
could be a good market. You can make like little tax.
And there are, the bigger the python, the more money you get paid. If you destroy a python nest, you get like $500.
Whoa.
Again, these are non-native species. Nothing eats them. So their population in the Everglades has expanded as they were introduced. There's tons and tons of examples. I think I talked about all of this.
Snakehead.
The snakehead is a fish. This is kind of interesting.
Like a Zulu.
Kudzu is, you don't see it around here. You see it in the south more. Southeast United States, Georgia, Florida, Alabama. Was a plant that was brought here purposely and planted. It grows extremely quickly. This is how much kudzu grows in just a single year. Goes from winter when it died off to completely covering all of the trees, even this little cabin there. That's how much it can grow because nothing eats it. It's an invasive species. Dutch elm disease killed almost all the elm trees.
Okay.
If you came to our area 50 years ago, the Parkway in Utica, you probably would have seen elm trees on each side. They grow up and they form this beautiful canopy over the road. People planted them along each side. But a disease, Dutch elm disease, was introduced to North America and basically killed almost all of the elm trees.
Are elm trees still here?
They're still here and there, but typically when you find them, they're like diseased. They're not healthy. They can't grow in the numbers they could before this disease was introduced here.
Like, how many are still around?
There's still a
And
few.
there's still a lot. They're not like in danger of becoming extinct, but they're not healthy. There's others. There's emerald ash borer, which goes into ash trees and all sorts of.
I mean, there's obviously a
And-
way to get rid of an invasive species. You
How do you get rid of them? Well, they're hard.
I mean, there's
Like
ways.
if they really like these zebra mussels, there's so many of them. You can't like by hand like remove them all. Sometimes you could use like chemicals to kill them. One thing that people sometimes do is they try to find a predator from their native habitat and bring it to where they're invasive and release it.
Yeah.
For example, with the loosestrife, there's a tiny beetle that lives in Europe, and it keeps the population of loosestrife in check there. So some people have raised those beetles and released them here. I've done it. I released them in the Utica Marsh in hopes of these beetles
Japanese
being
beetles.
able to control the population
Are
here.
Japanese beetles invasive?
They're non-native, yep.
Oh, cool.
But that's the danger, right? If you purposely bring a species and bring it here to eat the loosestrife, well, maybe that's going to get out of control. So you have to be really careful about how you research and do these.
I mean, if I were it, I'd like tell the people, you know, like you could do something. You could make them like into souvenirs or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Cut down the population a bit.
All right. Well, let's stop there for today.
You know who would be really good teaching this?
Me?
Captain Planet.
Oh.
You ever heard of Captain Planet? He was like a big superhero in the 90s who taught